Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Issei become a solar god part 1. Before I start, please do support for more awesome content and subscribe my channel and like this video and also share this video with your friends. I have created my other videos playlist, there you can watch my all videos easily, check out as well. Let's start this video. The sun. It was virtually one of the most powerful sources of energy in the universe. Well, it was certainly not the greatest and omnipotent source of all, it was potent nonetheless. It represented the conscious ego, the self, and expression, personal power, pride, authority, leadership qualities, and the principles of creativity, spontaneity, health, and vitality. The sun itself had the potential ability to inflate and implode upon itself, commencing the destruction of a Class 5 or X apocalypse. The severity of the sun was like a nuclear furnace that provided the colossal source of energy for many light years in any direction. In ancient times, the sun was revered as a deity or an object of divine origins. The goddess of the sun and the universe, Amaterasu, was the one who shined in the heavens. Amaterasu Omikami was the supreme goddess of Shintoism and the ruler of the plane of heaven. As she floated above the skies, bringing light back into the world, the goddess adopted a look of thoughtfulness on her face. The goddess of the sun had long jet black hair that reached all the way down to her waist. Her eyes maintained an almond shape and a deep brown-black color, and she had a pale skin complexion. As she looked down from the sky, there appeared to be a baby clutched protectively in her arms. The infant was sleeping softly in his mother's arms, completely peaceful. Amaterasu tilted her head and placed her hand gently over her infant son. Immediately after, an aura of solar energy whirled around the baby. The infant's body began to glow in intensity until his skin gained a much lighter tone. His hair began to rise up slightly and gain a reddish-purple shade of coloring before it returned to its original light brown color. The sun, as well as its nigh-infinite solar energy output, was used and manipulated by Amaterasu in order to conceive the child in her arms. As a result, the child had no physical father, but instead he was created from the vast energies of the sun and the goddess of the sun herself. Amaterasu smiled as she felt the power of her son grow. She looked around the trenches of the sky and then she sighed as she looked back to her son. My precious little son. I want nothing more than to keep you here with me, but you cannot stay here. I wish you could, but with your dreadful uncle Susanoo, I would be a fool to risk doing such a thing. In spite of her animosity towards her brother, Amaterasu knew that the weight of Susanoo's presence on Takamagahara was minuscule compared to the rest of the dysfunctional world they dwelled upon. Susanoo no Mikoto, the god of the sea and storms and the younger brother of Amaterasu, was known for his fierce temper. Amaterasu would never forget the event in which Susanoo destroyed her rice fields, hurled that damn pony at her loom, and decimated one of her attendants. These acts were the reason for Amaterasu hiding herself in the Amano Wado, heavenly rock cave. This caused the sun to fade away and as a result, life forces began to deteriorate. Eventually, Amaterasu was persuaded to leave the cave and from that point on the sun returned to its nigh mighty throne in the universe. Amaterasu was well aware of Susanoo's petulant nature. If her brother became aware of the being she had conceived from the sun, he would no doubt want to challenge and harm her infant, no doubt due to the Shinto storm god's jealous nature. But the presence of her brother wasn't the only reason she was making her choice. Susanoo was a mild nuisance compared to the other reason. I do not want you to suffer in this world, my sweet. It is far too dangerous for someone like you to be involved in. As she watched over the sky, she looked down to see an explosive and flame-like aura covering her son entirely. Amaterasu smiled warmly and swirls of solar flares began to cover her body entirely as her physical body disappeared. I City, Honshik, Japan. Amaterasu reappeared with her son and looked around the inner shrine. Issei Grand Shrine was a Shinto shrine that was dedicated to Amaterasu. The shrine consisted of two groups of buildings, the Imperial Shrine, Kotai Jingu, also known as the Naiku, Inner Shrine, and the Toyaku Shrine, Toyaku Jingu, which formed the Jeku or Outer Shrine. The shrines were constructed of wood, and every 20 years both were rebuilt. The empty side of the previous shrine, also known as the Kadenshi, was strewn by white pebbles. The building on the empty site was a small wooden shed. The goddess of the sun frowned as she walked over to the mirror and looked at it for a couple moments. It was the reason for her leaving the heavenly rock cave. As she looked at her reflection for the second time, she tilted her head and looked down to her son. With a saddened look, she laid her infant down onto the ground of Issei Shrine and crouched down to him, gazing at him lovingly. Feeling her eyes watering, she gave her son a brief but loving kiss on his forehead and softly rubbed his hair. I love you. So much. Amaterasu uttered sadly, even if I am not with you physically as the sun, I will always be there. As she petted her son's head, Amaterasu released a quivering sigh as her body started to flicker in and out, her presence returning to Takamegahara. The couple walked towards the Issei shrine, with various assortments of clothing and food clutched in their hands. The man had spiky brown hair and brown eyes, while the woman had long brown hair and a ponytail and warm brown eyes. The couple were known as Mitsuru Goru Hyoudou and Sachiko Hyoudou. Married for several years, the two had no children, living only by themselves. Mr. Hyoudou was an ordinary office worker, while Mrs. Hyoudou was a full-time housewife. They had both come to Toxi City in order to honor the sun goddess known as Amaterasu. As they walked inside the shrine, the Hyoudou couple paused in their steps as they heard something strange. They turned to see an infant crying on the floor. Mrs. Hyoudou walked closer to the infant, and her brown eyes widened as she quickly approached. The baby with brown hair was struggling to lift himself off the floor. "Hey baby, what's he doing here in the shrine?" Sachiko muttered out as she gently picked up the baby. Mitsuru walked over to his wife and raised an eyebrow. "Did someone leave him here?" Mrs. Hyoudou didn't respond as she looked at the baby more closely. The infant was absolutely adorable and there was a certain aura about him. Her eyes widened as a golden aura suddenly emanated from the infant. The aura then changed to a flame-like reddish aura, which seemed to explode outwardly. The ground of Issei Grand Shrine began to shake in tremors, with Sachiko and Mitsuru doing their best to maintain their balance. Moments later, the aura surrounding the baby abruptly dissipated, allowing the Hyoudou couple to regain their balance. They looked at the infant with curiosity and awe on their faces. What on earth just happened? The infant stopped his crying, and he opened his eyes, prompting the Hyoudou couple's eyes to widen even further. Mitsuru, his eyes. There Mrs. Hyoudou stuttered. Mr. Hyoudou walked over to look at the baby, and he rubbed his head in puzzlement. "It's strange. He looks like he could be our son, Sachiko, but those eyes of his." The Hyoudou couple looked around the shrine in hopes of trying to find who the infant belonged to, but as they looked around more, there was no one in sight. Mrs. Hyoudou sighed as she looked back at the infant. "It's as though someone left him here, and as far as I know, we were the only ones to come to the shrine today. Should we take him home with us?" "Well, it's like I said. He looks just like us. It's strange." The Hyoudou couple looked at each other and then they looked back at the infant. "What should we name him?" Mr. Hyoudou asked. Mrs. Hyoudou looked around her surroundings and then she smiled. "Issei. We'll call him Issei." "We're calling him Issei. You mean after the shrine?" Mr. Hyoudou asked. "Well yes, that." The Hyoudou matriarch said as she smiled at the newly named infant and hugged him close to her, but also Issei want him to live an honest and sincere life. The newly christened Issei's eyes started to flutter as Sachiko's warm embrace enveloped him. That's right. Our little Issei. Realm of heaven." The handsome-looking young man with long blonde hair and green eyes looked up in an abrupt manner. His 12 golden wings that jutted out from his back glowed in interest from the sudden surge of godly energy. The energy he felt was akin to that of the sun. It was absolutely monstrous. "Michael? Do you feel that power as well?" Michael, the leader of the angels and the seraphim, turned around to see an extremely beautiful woman with curly blonde hair and a voluptuous figure. "So you sensed it as well, Gabriel." Gabriel, an angel and a seraph, also one of the guardians of the throne of heaven, put her hand on her chest and smiled as she felt the great power surge. "This power. It's so vast and overwhelming, but at the same time, it's so pristine. It brings me such joy and warmth." Michael's green eyes widened again and he turned back around as he continued to gauge the level of the overwhelming pressure. As the first creation of the biblical god, Michael didn't expect to sense a great surge of power like this, a power that was akin to the sun. Where is this power coming from? In the underworld. The man in his 20s with black hair and golden bangs looked up in amusement as he suddenly sensed a great power. What's this? The monstrous power had suddenly risen out of nowhere and it piqued the man's interest greatly. "Maybe I'll keep an eye on this. This should be interesting." "Surzik-sama. Do you sense it?" The handsome, young man in his early 20s with shoulder-length crimson red hair and blue-green eyes nodded in response as he looked over to see a maid with silver hair and matching eyes. "Yes Graphia, I do. It's a very unique surge of power. Enormous even, and it seems to be constantly rising as well. I wonder who possesses that power." 5 years later. "What do you want? No one asked you to come over here. What's with your eyes? They're weirding us out. Go somewhere else." The 6-year-old Issei Hyoudou looked down shyly as he walked away from the kids during break time. He sat on the school bench and watched as the kids played around the playground. Recess had just started and already the kids were ostracizing him. Issei was a very soft-spoken yet kind child. As such he was a very silent boy as he rarely spoke to anyone. With his quiet nature and shy demeanor, people often labeled Issei as a mute child. The little boy never once wanted to play with the kids around his age, seeing as they made fun of the particular aspect of himself that was quick to notice. His eyes. His left eye was a soft and warm almond light brown color, while the right eye was a bright yellow-orange shade. Issei was often ostracized due to the different colors of his eyes, and so, he chose to stay only to himself. But sadly, Issei couldn't catch a break. As he sat on the bench, Issei looked over to see a couple of boys walking towards him. Looking at them cautiously, he moved off of the bench and went to go somewhere else until one of the boys appeared in front of him. The little Issei stopped and stood still, waiting for the verbal bullying to begin. Although Issei had been bullied, he chose to endure through it all. He didn't particularly have any wish for payback, as he knew it was just a waste of his own time, but very slowly, the bullying was starting to get on his nerves. The name-calling, he could handle. Hell, even isolation he could handle, but physical confrontation was something that he never experienced before. Let's find out what happens, shall we? Hey, weirdo, where do you think you're going? One of the boys asked. Issei ignored them and remained still. He wasn't going to bother speaking to the boys. What's wrong, weirdo? Cat got your tongue? There was still no response from the brown-haired little boy, and one of the boys narrowed his eyes. Hey. We're talking to you, dummy. The boy raised his fist up and landed a punch to Issei's head. Suddenly, a golden flame-like aura manifested around Issei, and it flared out explosively. The kids playing on the playground turned to see who was screaming, and they gasped. The boy who had attempted to punch Issei suddenly recoiled and drew his hand back in shock. The boy's hand was burning profusely as a result of the contact of Issei's aura. The boys, frightened from the scene they witnessed, quickly ran away, cursing Issei's name. If they had turned around to look back at Issei, they would have seen a greatly pained and saddened expression on the little boy's face. 2 hours later. Issei. Let's go out for some ice cream, okay sweetie. Sachiko Hyoudou looked down at her son as they walked hand in hand towards the store. She had found out about the incident between Issei and one of his bullies, and if she was completely honest with herself, she was just concerned about her son. She knew how Issei suffered at school due to his unique eye coloration. However, she and Mitsuru accepted that quality about him, but they also noticed that as Issei grew, so did a few of his quirks. The Hyoudou couple noticed the changes in Issei as the years passed by. When the sun was up, Issei was noticeably more lively. Not cheerful, yet not melancholic either. He seemed to have a lot of physical energy for a little boy. When the sun was down, however, Issei seemed to be a little reclusive, waiting for the sun to come back up. As they approached the ice cream parlor, Mrs. Hyoudou looked down to her son. We're here, honey. What flavor did you want? Issei looked up at the categories and tilted his head. Scanning the list, the little boy lifted his finger and pointed to the desired flavor. Sachiko followed her son's direction and she smiled. Did you want mint chocolate chip, sweetie? Issei nodded in response. Mrs. Hyoudou smiled and directed Issei to sit on the nearby bench. As he waited for his mother to order the ice cream, Issei looked around his surroundings and looked up to see the sun. He never understood why, but the sun gave Issei so much energy and warmth. No matter how hot the sun was or how much the temperature was, Issei could always endure it. As he looked back around, Issei jumped in surprise at the sight that had suddenly appeared in his direction. Sitting next to him on the bench was a tall woman with long black hair and dark gray empty eyes. She had pale white skin and pointed ears and appeared to be dressed in a gothic Lolita fashion. What creeped out Issei the most was that the woman was staring at him with a hollow gaze, completely devoid of emotion and expression. As Issei looked at the woman with caution in his eyes, he looked down to see 2 large orbs of flesh that seemed to be barely covered by cross-shaped black tapes. The young Issei felt his face redden at the sight of the woman's abundant chest, and he attempted to look away as he scooted away from the woman. He looked back at the ice cream parlor to see his mother talking cordially with the cashier. When the little boy turned back around, he immediately felt a cold hand place itself on the back of his head. His body went tense from the invasive touch, and Issei looked up and was too late to react as the cold hand pushed him forward, causing the child to be enclosed into the warmth of soft yet bountiful pillows of flesh. At this point, Issei was frantic as the woman continued to suffocate him with her chest. After a few agonizing moments, his head was finally pulled back, allowing Issei to regain his breath. As he recovered, Issei flinched when the woman suddenly moved so that her face was close to his in a matter of seconds. Issei started to sweat and tried to back away before realizing that he was almost at the edge of the bench. Keeping his mouth shut, Issei slowly looked back up at the woman, who still stared at him with her dispassionate gaze. The woman lifted her finger up and placed it on Issei's forehead, gently sliding it across his temple. Issei shivered at the woman's touch, and an ominous feeling came over him when he suddenly saw a series of snakes manifest around the woman. One of the snakes crawled onto the terrified Issei and opened its mouth, revealing its fangs. Issei gasped and tried to move the snake away before he felt the snake embed its fangs into his neck. The woman's eyes noticeably narrowed, gaining a more hollow look in them. Suddenly, a familiar explosive and golden sparkling aura manifested around Issei and traveled to the snake. The woman's dark eyes widened as the snake's body slowly began to disintegrate. Showing an expression that was akin to surprise, she removed her finger from Issei's forehead. Issei gained a fearful look in his eyes and he got off of the bench in order to put some distance between him and the woman. The little boy rubbed his sore neck, but there were no physical marks to be seen. As he looked up at his apparent attacker, he felt his nervousness skyrocket at the curious look the woman was giving him. Office, the infinite dragon god, also known as the Ouroboros dragon, tilted her head at the little boy in front of her. Before leaving the dimensional gap, Office had sensed a godly source of energy. The power seemed radiant yet enormously vast. The power from this boy seemed to exude a presence not unlike solar energy. Solar energy was a source that was often stated to be potentially limitless due to its substance deriving from the sun. There were no known limits of the amount of light and heat the sun could produce. With the colossal amount of solar energy within this young boy, the energy could be converted into pure raw power and strength. So long as the sun remained, of course. Eerily quiet, Office leaned her face closer to the young Issei. Staring at Issei with her dark gray eyes, Office suddenly gave Issei a spine-chilling smile. No sharp teeth. No fangs. The confused Issei could only stay still, not knowing what to do. The young boy suddenly felt two cold hands placing themselves on his cheeks. Shivering again from the temperature of the woman's hands, Issei looked into his gray eyes and felt a little unnerved by the eerie smile on her face. Moments later, Issei flinched when Office puckered her lips out and gently pressed them to his forehead. The Ouroboros dragon's body shivered from the contact and her eyes glazed over. She could already feel the dormant power within the boy and at this rate, he would ultimately become stronger in due time. You belong to me, Office stated, her voice monotone, yet deep and sultry as she hugged Issei close to her chest, my little mate. Issei. At the call of his name, Issei found enough strength within him to push himself away from the woman's tight grasp. He turned around and looked up to see his mother holding two ice cream cups. Issei looked back in front of him and gasped when he saw that the woman had disappeared, as though she was never there to begin with. Trembling a little from the unexpected encounter, Issei almost missed Mrs. Hyoudou handing him his treat. Issei's room. From his bed, Issei looked out the window as he watched the sunset. He never liked it when the sun descended into the night, but he wasn't afraid of the dark. He just preferred the sun to be out most of the time. As he situated himself and snuggled into his bed, Issei closed his eyes and allowed himself to fall into a peaceful sleep. The pure white magic circle suddenly appeared next to the little Issei's bed and a silhouette emerged from the circle. The silhouette brightened, revealing the angel Gabriel. Gabriel quietly walked over to the bed which contained the source of the potentially limitless power she and Michael had been sensing. She tilted her head as she gazed at the sleeping Issei. What a pleasant energy. Both she and Michael had deduced that the power the young Issei had was akin to that of the powerful radiation of the sun. The longer the sun rose up in the sky, the more powerful Issei became as he grew. The little boy was going to grow into a force to be reckoned with soon enough. Gabriel tilted her head as she placed her hand on Issei's cheek, rubbing it gently. He's so pure. It's strange. Despite this fragility, I can feel an enormous amount of godly solar energy within him. The angel sighed and lowered her head, puckering his lips out to kiss Issei on his forehead. The pure white magic circle appeared from under her and she disappeared once more. 11 years later. Hey. I heard we're getting a new student today. Really? Yeah. I hear it's supposed to be a boy. A boy? What do you think he's going to be like? Maybe he'll be as cute as Hyoudou-san. No way, impossible. The group of girls gossiped about the sudden news of a never-before-seen student arriving at the school known as Kuo Academy. The institution was originally an all-girls school, but was formed into a co-ed school, along with a new school building that was made. Students conversed in the hallways, waiting to go into their classes. Outside of the school, a young man with brown hair walked up to the gates of Kuo Academy. Dressed in a black blazer with white accents, a white long-sleeved dress shirt with a black ribbon on the collar, matching black pants, and brown dress shoes, Issei Hyoudou quietly walked up to his new school. Walking inside, he noticed that the hallways were very quiet. Being none the wiser, he proceeded to find his first classroom. From above him, a girl stood at the top of the steps. Her wavy long crimson hair fell down to her thighs as she looked down. Her blue-green eyes narrowed and kept watch on the new student, a mysterious smile forming on her face as she twirled a piece of her hair. Very interesting. So he's our new cowhai. Sona will definitely be intrigued with him. Yes, you are absolutely unique little cowhide. Ria's smile slowly changed to a contemplative frown. It's almost strange. She said to herself, his aura is so overwhelming, but there's a certain quality about it that's not unpleasant. Issei's classroom. Knock knock. Pausing in her demonstration, the teacher walked over to the door and opened it. A warm smile passed across her lips and she turned back to look at her class. Okay, class. I'm sure you've all heard that we have a new student coming here today. Well, you heard right. Here he is, so please welcome him. Issei Hyoudou nervously walked inside his classroom, trying to avoid the eyes of the many students. Immediately, he received a series of unreadable glances from the class. Hey. What's with his eyes? A girl whispered to her friend. Are they contacts or something? His eyes look kind of weird. Issei looked away as he released an inaudible sigh. Just as he predicted, some of the girls were already giggling in his direction, while some of the males took their time glancing at him with uncertainty and judgment in their eyes. He hadn't even been in his first classroom for less than 5 minutes, and here he was, already being judged upon. The teacher looked at her new student and offered a sympathetic smile. Why don't you introduce yourself? You don't have to be so shy. Complying with his teacher's suggestion, Issei looked up at the class and he bowed down in respect. Hello. My name's Issei Hyoudou. I'm new here. So please take it easy on me. A number of the girls noticed the soft-spoken and quiet tone in Issei's voice and they felt a bit confused. The males on the other hand raised some eyebrows as they noticed Issei's last words. Take it easy. One of them whispered to the other, what's he talking about? The teacher blinked as she too noticed Issei's last words, but she made a reassuring smile. Why don't you go take a seat? The girl suddenly raised her hand from her desk, intending to get Issei's attention. Hyoudou-kun, over here. You can sit with me. Issei looked up and saw a black-haired girl with innocent violet eyes. The girl smiled and patted the desk next to her. Issei walked over to the desk and sat quietly as he listened to the teacher. He noticed some of the students giving him weird looks, most likely about his eyes. Sitting comfortably in his seat, Issei quickly noticed that the girl was not too subtly looking over at him. She then edged forward to him to whisper. My name's Yuma Amano. It's nice to meet a new student as cute as you. She said with a wink at the end. Not expecting the words to come out of Yuma's mouth, Issei blinked in surprise and he mumbled a hesitant thanks in reply. Holding back a giggle, Yuma smiled warmly and looked back at the teacher. Had Issei not turned to look back at the teacher, he would have seen Yuma's eyes quickly glancing to him from the side. What's with this kid? Azazel-sama told me to watch him. He also told me that this young boy had a strange energy, but this aura is so ethereal. It's completely untainted. I've never sensed anything like it before. She continued to watch Issei with an unreadable look on her face for the rest of the class period. End of school. As he made his way out of the school, Issei placed his hands in his pockets and tread forward, his hearing picking up the chatter of the students around him. His eyes? They're so strange looking. One brown, one yellow-orange. The right eye looks like the color of the sun. Issei-kun. Blinking in surprise, Issei turned around to see Yuma running towards him. She smiled at him and put her hands behind her back. I was just wondering. If you wouldn't mind, would you like to hang out sometime? Issei blinked several times and he was about to respond until he noticed that the sun was descending slowly. Looking back at Yuma, Issei shook his head and sent her a sad expression. Sorry. I have to go. I've got to go back home. I'll see you tomorrow, Yuma-san. He said quietly. Yuma once again noted his soft-spoken tone in Issei's voice and she felt herself a little captivated by it. As she watched Issei leave, Yuma's confused expression evaporated into an impatient look. The top of the building of Kuo Academy, 4 young women stood watching Issei depart his new school. One of the girls, specifically a red-haired individual, sighed. Such a very interesting boy. I haven't seen anyone quite like him. He's so quiet and shy it makes me want to hold him and give him a hug. Though, his eyes seem to be the subject of mostly everyone's minds. The well-endowed girl with black hair tied in a ponytail with an orange ribbon let out a seductive giggle as she watched Issei cross the bridge. Her violet eyes almost seemed to gleam as she turned to look at her red-haired friend. RR. Despite that baby face of his, he's so mysterious. That aura radiating off of him is so otherworldly. It makes me want to spoil him so much already just to see his reaction. It's his first day and you already have the urge to spoil him? A third girl with glasses commented in annoyance. Her eyes narrowed in contemplation as the visage of Issei started to disappear from her and the rest of the girl's sights. He's certainly gathered my attention. His aura is so utterly clear. I don't think this young boy is even aware of how potent his aura is. He's earned quite the stares from the other students, but he just looks away, albeit in a reclusive manner. What do you think? She turned to look at the girl next to her, with the latter having knee-length black hair and blue semi-rimmed glasses. The girl adopted a serious expression as she answered. His eyes? They contrast so much. One is brown, like the color of an innocent doe, but the other one has the color of our sun. Such a strange boy. Does he interest you that much, Fuku Kaichu? The orange ribbon-wearing girl asked. You misunderstand me. The blue glasses-wearing girl responded as her face developed a pinkish-red tinge. Don't be so embarrassed. You're not the only one who's interested in our little cowhide. Smiling at her friend, the crimson-haired girl narrowed her eyes. And to think, Azazel has already sent some of his subordinates to watch him. Yuma Mono, or should I say, Rainer is proof of that. Looking down at Yuma who seemed to be deep in thought, the crimson-haired beauty then looked towards Issei, and her blue-green eyes brightened. Pure as light, yet so powerful as the sun itself. You really are an interesting boy, Issei Hyoudou. In the underworld, base of the fallen angels. So, how was he today? He really didn't look anything special, Azazel-sama. He just looked so shy. Yuma Mono had her arms behind her back as she answered a man with black hair and golden bangs. Azazel, also known as the leader of the fallen angels, crossed his arms in thought. Azazel-sama. Yuma began, I understand his aura was one of the main reasons you asked me to watch him, but what's the other reason? Do you believe him to have some type of sacred gear? Azazel hummed as he looked off to the side. Not exactly. His aura is definitely not human. Excluding the fact that sacred gears can be stolen, only humans and half-humans can wield them. This kid on the other hand, has a godly aura and it's completely inhuman. So he doesn't have one. The godly aura Yuma mused to herself, so could he perhaps be a deity? More or less. Azazel replied nonchalantly, earning an annoyed look from Yuma. Yuma looked down on the ground and placed her hands to her side. It'd explain why he's so damn strong. Both Yuma and Azazel looked over to see a young woman with navy blue hair and brown eyes. She was dressed in a trench coat, miniskirt, and black-heeled shoes. She also wore a gold necklace around her neck. Azazel smirked and lifted up a finger. Whether he's a deity or not, he's certainly powerful enough on his own. The male fallen angel then hummed to himself as he pondered for a moment. But if he did, I wonder what it'd be. Near Issei's house. Issei sighed as he continued on his way home. Well, at least it wasn't too bad today. His first day at school was actually tolerable than he had anticipated. He didn't have to deal with the bullying or physical confrontation at all. Some of the rumors regarding his eyes, he could handle that already. Reaching all the way to his house, Issei looked over to see that his parents' cars were gone. Blinking in wonderment, Issei opened the house door and peered inside, widening his eyes at the first thing he saw. The beautiful girl with long dark silver hair, which was tied up into a ponytail, and dark ruby eyes, looked up as she heard the sound of Issei walking into his house. Issei stared wide-eyed as he gazed at the unreadable look in the girl's eyes. The young man only raised an eyebrow when he noticed a playful-looking smirk slowly forming on the girl's face. The smirk on her face immediately softened into a warm smile as she inwardly sighed. Long time no see, my dear Satoko. Liko-san? What are you doing here? Liko Hyoudou, the adoptive older cousin of Issei, crossed her arms as she sent her crimson eyes towards Issei. You don't sound or look happy to see me. No, Issei quickly tried to defend himself as he stuttered. Liko raised an eyebrow, but she continued to walk forward with Issei. As of now, she had never interacted much with her adoptive cousin. The only time she had seen him was when she and her parents often visited the Hyoudou residence all those years ago. But even then, it was rare for her to even talk to Issei, let alone get him to talk to her, due to his reclusive nature. Not unlike her parents and Mr. and Mrs. Hyoudou, Liko never possessed any ounce of animosity against Issei about the different coloration of his eyes. However, not even she was blind to tell that those eyes were the reason her adoptive cousin was so quiet. Seeing a nearby bench, Liko put her arms to her side and with a wave of her hand, she directed Issei. Satoko, over here. Come sit with your cousin. Issei, noticing Liko's movement, complied and followed the girl in order to sit on the bench with her. As the cousins looked around the area of the shopping centers, the female of the two crossed her legs. Issei. Issei turned to look at Liko in response. You didn't really give me a reply to my earlier statement. You're not mad that I came to visit, are you? Issei's eyes softened and he looked his cousin in the eyes. No, of course not. I'm not mad at all. It's just that I didn't expect for you to arrive at my house today. Liko gave a warm smile in response. It's best to keep things interesting. Had you been informed earlier, you probably would have stayed upstairs in your room just to avoid seeing me. That's not true, Liko-san. The girl's eyes widened at the honest tone in her cousin's voice before she smiled and looked off to the side. How sweet of you. Well, at least you're actually talking more. When I used to come over to your house, you were as quiet as a mouse, it was hard to get you to speak at all. Hell, it was hard to even find you in the house. I like my privacy. Issei muttered to himself. Sure you do. Liko teased, before sitting up from her spot. So your mom told me that today was your first day at your new school. How was it? Issei looked up at the girl, and his eyes seemed to have gained a much brighter edge to them. It was okay. Just okay. I didn't really talk to anyone at school today. Ah. So that's okay. A smile spread across Liko's lips. Were any of the girls at your school attractive, Issei? To be honest, I didn't really look or pay attention. I was just waiting for the classes to end. Liko's eyes rolled in mock exasperation. Knowing you, I wouldn't have expected anything less. She said, albeit in a teasing tone. Issei flushed slightly in embarrassment, prompting Liko to chuckle again. My poor naive Issei. You're too innocent for your own good. Raising an eyebrow in confusion at the comment, Issei tilted his head. Liko looked over to the nearby bookstore and smiled. I've been wanting to find something to read. Bookstore? This isn't exactly what I had in mind when you said we should hang out, Liko-san. After teasing her adoptive cousin for a little while, Liko had decided to take Issei with her to the bookstore. According to Mrs. Hyoudou, Issei had a lot of interest in the sun, and after realizing that she desired to buy some new books of her own, Liko thought this was the perfect opportunity to spend some time with the shy ball of light that embodied her cousin. Well, since I initiated it, I get to take you wherever I go. Liko said, sticking out her tongue at him. I don't think that's how it works. Issei retorted, before he frowned softly, and besides, I don't need any books. That's true. You don't need any books, but you do need to take part in something other than lying around in your room and waiting for the sun to rise back up. I won't have my little cousin being a social outcast. You need to get out more often. The young man sighed from his cousin's remark and compiled as he looked around the sections and categories of the store. Liko chuckled and walked away from Issei, giving him some space. About 10 minutes later, Issei stopped and crossed his arms. For a bookstore, it sure had a large space. As he walked further, Issei looked over to the next aisle and he bumped into someone. Issei collided with the unknown figure and they both fell onto the ground. Rubbing his sore chest, Issei looked up to see a young man with short blonde hair and gray eyes. He wore the Kuo Academy boys' school uniform, albeit without the blazer, and his sleeves were rolled up. Scattered next to him were an assortment of notepads and writing utensils. Feeling guilty, Issei went to pick up the items and handed them to the boy. Sorry about that. The short blonde-haired boy shook his hair to fix it and smiled gratefully as he accepted the items back. It's all right, man. His gray eyes then widened in surprise. Hey. I've seen you before. As they both stood up, Issei blinked from the other boy's comment. He didn't remember seeing the guy in front of him at all. The young man pointed to Issei and he smiled cordially. Yeah, you're the new student that came to Kuo Academy today, right? He's a student there too? Issei thought to himself, looking down when the young man held out his hand. What's up, man? The name's Genshiro Saji. I'm the secretary of the Kuo Academy Student Council. Issei reached his hand and shook Saji's own in respect. Issei Hyoudou. It's nice to meet you. Saji smiled wider. Nice to meet you, newbie. He replied, his new nickname prompting Issei to pause for a moment before nodding. So this is the guy Kaichu told us about. Saji thought to himself, she was right. He's got a lot of power. Though by the way he acts, you wouldn't be able to perceive him as strong. His eyes are kind of weird, but it's not like anyone else's normal these days. Wait, Issei began, suddenly remembering a fact about Saji. You said you were a secretary or something. Yeah, of the student council. What does the student council do? Well, we basically help share students' ideas, interests, and concerns with teachers and the school principal. So you're like the speakers for the students at Kuo Academy. Yeah, I guess you could put it like that. Issei. Both Issei and Saji turned to see Liko, who had already acquired a few books of her own. Liko-san. Liko smiled as she walked over to her cousin. She had already known where he was, seeing as he tended to wander around unfamiliar places. She had to admit she was a little surprised and proud to see that Issei was actually talking to someone. Perhaps her little cousin was edging out of his own shell. Just a little bit. I see you haven't found any books yet. Issei let out a light scoff as he looked away, while Saji held back a chuckle at the sight. Liko crossed her arms and looked over to Saji. So, your name? I'm Genshiro Saji. I go to the same school as your cousin. Really? Well, it sure is a small world, isn't it? Looking back to her quiet cousin, Liko sent him a smirk. We're not leaving until you pick out at least one book, Issei. Sighing at his cousin's stubbornness, Issei looked over to Saji and nodded his head to the young man. "It was nice to meet you, Saji-san." Saji smiled and nodded in respect. "Likewise, newbie." Issei's house. "Now that wasn't so hard, was it?" Liko teased, prompting Issei to frown at her. "I don't see why you need so many books." Issei commented. "Because I like to read." "Why did you pick only one book?" Liko answered. Issei chose not to respond. "That's what I thought." After persuading, though if one were to ask him, it was more like forcing Issei to purchase a book so they could leave the bookstore, Liko felt a bit more satisfied as she sat on her cousin's couch. She felt proud of herself for bringing Issei out of his shell, even if it was a little bit. Looking at the book in Issei's hand, Liko pointed to it. "What's the book supposed to be about?" Issei looked at his book and he lowered his head somewhat. He showed Liko the front of the book. "Return of the Sun." "Interesting title." Liko said. She wouldn't put it past her expectations for Issei to purchase a book whose plot centered around the sun. Laying back onto the couch, Liko opened her first book and inwardly sighed as she relaxed. "Hey, Liko-san." Turning her attention to her cousin, Liko put down her book. "So what are you doing here, anyway?" Staring at her cousin for a moment, Liko smirked and crossed her arms. "Is it a crime to visit my baby cousin?" Issei's eyebrows raised at the name. "Baby cousin? Fufu?" Liko chuckled as her crimson ruby eyes glinted in amusement. Feeling a bit confused by his cousin's faint giggling, Issei turned his attention to his recently purchased book. Looking at her cousin for a few moments, Liko set her eyes over to her book. "Liko-san." At the call of her name being spoken once more, Liko gave her younger cousin her attention. While her face didn't show it, she felt a slight wave of happiness that her cousin was actually starting to talk more. Issei opened his mouth, but then he closed it. Liko frowned at her cousin's behavior. It almost looked like Issei wanted to say something and was genuinely trying to get the words out of his mouth. "What is it, Isatoko?" Liko asked gently, wanting her cousin to let it out. The elder Hyoudou felt a bit of pride as the sound of her voice seemed to bring Issei out of his nervousness. "What happened to your hair?" Issei asked softly. Liko's eyes widened a bit at the question. "My hair?" she repeated. "Yeah." Issei answered with a nod. "Why is it all gray? You're not getting old that quickly, are you?" At Issei's last sentence, Liko tried in vain to suppress the amused smile that threatened to split her face. Leave it to her precious Isatoko to ask something like that in his usual naive fashion. Of course, if it had been anyone else, Liko would have had a more violent reaction. "No, silly." Liko humored her younger cousin, "I'm not getting old. I just dyed my hair." "You killed your own hair?" Issei asked in a hesitant tone with a tilt of his head. The urge to either flick her cousin on the forehead or shake her head in disbelief reached Liko's mind. The elder Hyoudou let out a sigh as she looked her cousin straight in his eyes. "Isatoko?" she uttered. Issei asked, wondering what his cousin wanted. "Flick." Issei rubbed his forehead in surprise, while Liko lightly glared at him with her arms crossed. "I changed the color of my hair, Issei," she explained. The slight pain in his forehead slowly fading away, Issei removed his hand from his temple and blinked several times at his cousin. Her smile returning, Liko sat in a more casual position. "What do you think, Isatoko?" she asked as she placed a few strands of her hair behind her ear. "Do you like it?" Issei blinked again as he titled his head. Liko-san looked so different. Not expecting her cousin to say that, Liko didn't react. She didn't know how to interpret Issei's answer, so she was at a loss on what to do or how to proceed next. "But if Liko-san's happy with it," Issei continued with a small yet faint smile, "then I guess I'm okay with it too. Plus, you kind of look like an angel." As much as she tried her damnedest to hold it in, Liko failed to stop the crimson blush that succeeded in spreading across her face. "You okay, Liko-san?" Issei asked in confusion, "Your face is all red." "I'm fine, Isatoko." Liko stammered, before she quickly composed herself and gave him a gentle smile. Her younger cousin blinked at her a few times before he smiled back in return and moved his attention back to his book. When she was sure that Issei was no longer paying any mind to the atmosphere around him, Liko's smile disappeared and was replaced by an embarrassed frown. "An angel?" The elder Hyoudou inaudibly sighed as she shook her head, trying once again to suppress her returning blush. Why did her little cousin have to say things like that? The student council room. "So you encountered Issei Hyoudou at a bookstore when you accidentally bumped into each other?" Saji nodded as he answered the girl with the bob-cut hairstyle. "Yeah, Sona Kaichu. You were right about him. He's strong, very strong." Sona Sitri, the president of the student council, narrowed her eyes as she crossed her arms. "What did he seem like?" Saji shrugged in response. "To be honest, he seemed pretty much like a shy guy. His personality doesn't really sync with how strong he is, but regardless, he's an alright guy." Sona looked over at the secretary of the student council, and she set her violet eyes to a different space in the room. What is the reason for his shyness? Saji turned around in surprise to see the girl with blue, semi-rimmed glasses looking at the piles of books on the shelf. I didn't really ask him. Saji answered. Underworld, residents of the Phoenix clan. A handsome young man in his early 20s with short blonde hair and dark blue eyes narrowed his eyes as he tried to ignore the intense surge of energy. For a number of years, he had sensed this power, and as it grew, so did his interest. Riser-sama. Ani-sama. Riser Phoenix, the third son of the Phoenix clan, turned around to face a large group which consisted of 15 young women. Shaking and rubbing his head, Riser crossed his arms. Don't bother me right now, girls. I have some thinking to do. Leaving the surprised group of girls, Riser retreated elsewhere, trying to figure out where and how the energy source came to be. This energy, it's a source not unlike that of the solar flares from the sun itself. It even rivals the heat of the Phoenix clan, perhaps even surpasses it. Shaking his head in order to clear his thoughts, Riser scoffed and looked away. What am I saying? This is ridiculous. Listen to me, I'm paranoid over something that I haven't even experienced or seen yet. Humph. Shaking off his paranoia for only a moment, Riser Phoenix walked off to another section of the underworld, hopeful in gathering some pleasant thoughts. Guo Academy, next day. Excuse me, Issei Hyoudou. At the call of his name, Issei stopped in his pace and turned to see a handsome young man with short blonde hair and light gray eyes walking towards him. The blonde-haired boy smiled at Issei and held out his hand. How are you? My name's Hyoudou Kiba. Issei reached to shake Hyoudou's hand in respect. It's nice to meet you too, Kiba-san. Nodding in respect, Hyoudou looked around the hallways and looked back at Issei. The word around school says you're a new student here. Am I right? Issei nodded in reply. Well then, I should tell you that I really think you like this school. Issei raised an eyebrow at Hyoudou's statement. I will. Hey look. It's Hyoudou Kiba. Our Prince Charming. Is that the new guy? He's so cute. Hey, maybe he's another Prince Charming. No way. We can't have more than one Prince Charming. Why not? Issei adopted a puzzled look from the strange comments he was hearing from the girls in the hallways. Hyoudou just smiled and shrugged his shoulders. I guess that means we're rivals, huh, Ice-san. The brown-haired young man was genuinely confused right now. He had no idea what the girls were talking about. Hey, Issei-kun. Both Issei and Hyoudou turned to see Uma Amano running towards them. Behind Issei, Hyoudou's eyes narrowed just a bit, but he quickly softened his expression and smiled. Uma noticed the demonic aura within Hyoudou, but she composed herself as she smiled at Issei. How are you doing? You worried me a little bit after school yesterday. Issei raised an eyebrow at her words, but then he remembered what Uma was talking about. Yeah, I was tired, so I wanted to get home as quickly as possible. Sorry I made you worry. No, it's fine. Uma smiled warmly, just as long as you're okay. Issei took notice of Uma's tone. Why was Uma so worried about him? He sure was interacting with a lot more people than he had anticipated. Looking cautiously at Hyoudou for a bit, Uma returned her sight to Issei. Hey, Ice-san. Hyoudou cheerfully interrupted her. Uma sent him a subtle but irritated glare to Hyoudou. How dare he interrupt me? And with a smile no less. Issei took a step back as he noticed Uma's eyes taking a more darker and sinister look. Hyoudou smiled as he continued his sentence. After school is over, I would appreciate it if you would come with me. At Kuo Academy, we have an organization called the Occult Research Club, and the president has been eager for you to see the club for yourself. The mention of the Devil's Club prompted a look of surprise from Uma. What does the daughter of the Gremory clan want with him? Are the devils watching him as well? Issei blinked at Hyoudou's offer and he lifted a finger up to speak until he started to hear a series of painful shouts from outside. Hey look. Someone's fighting the perverted duo outside. Perverted duo? Issei thought to himself. Issei, Hyoudou and Uma made their way outside to see a crowd of students. Pushing past the crowd, the trio looked in surprise to see two males groaning in agony on the ground. One male was a jock and the other male wore glasses. Why? All I wanted to do was touch some of your oppai. Why is she so cruel? Issei rubbed his head in confusion. Uma scoffed and crossed her arms, clearly not amused at the scene in front of her. Idiots. Issei blinked and looked over at Uma in puzzlement. You know them, Uma-san. Unfortunately. Mitsuda and Motohama. They're the infamous perverted students here at Kuo Academy. They've caused a lot of trouble here and it looks like someone actually did something about it. Such idiotic perverts. Lifting his head up at the familiar voice, Issei stared in awe at the sight of a familiar silver-haired girl, glaring coldly at both Mitsuda and Motohama. Liko-san. Issei Hyoudou looked up at the call of her name, and her harsh glare morphed into a warm and soft gaze as she smiled at Issei. Satoko. What happened over here? And why are you at Kuo Academy? Planting her foot on top of Motohama, Liko smiled as she explained the situation to her cousin. On a whim, I wanted to see what my baby cousin's school looked like, but as soon as I entered the school gates, I caught these two idiots following me. She kicked both of the perverts for good measure and crossed her arms. You're not planning to attend here, are you? Issei asked. If his cousin was attending Kuo Academy, it was definitely going to be a strange year for Issei, knowing Liko's personality. Liko closed her eyes and shook her head in response to Issei's question. Not a chance, cousin. I just wanted to see what your school looked like, that's all. Not a bad appearance at all. Both Yuma and Hyoudou shared reluctant glances as they watched a verbal exchange between Issei and Liko. Cousins, from what I can tell, her aura is completely human. Issei's on the other hand. That's weird. Her energy isn't the same at all as Ice-san's. Are they even related? Smiling in amusement, Liko stepped back and waved to Issei as she made her departure. Chuckling at the look on her cousin's face, Liko left the school gates, wondering other ways on how she could get Issei out of his shell. Take care, cousin. I'll see you at home. She called out to Issei. The crowd of students had already scattered back inside the school, leaving Issei, Yuma, Hyoudou, and the perverted duo outside. Ignoring the groans of pain from Mitsuda and Motohama, Yuma narrowed her eyes as she looked over to Issei. Well, I'll see you later, Ice-san. I've got to get back to class. Both Issei and Yuma turned to see Hyoudou waving goodbye at the former as he entered the school. Looking back at Issei, Yuma dissolved her serious look into a cheerful smile and she connected her arms with Issei's own. Issei flinched from the unexpected contact and he looked over at Yuma in surprise. Yuma giggled at the look on Issei's face. Come on, Issei-kun. We don't want to be late to class, do we? Giggling cheerfully, Yuma pulled the unresponsive yet surprised Issei inside Kuo Academy. Above the building floated a familiar figure. The figure possessed the appearance of a long black-haired young girl with hollow dark gray eyes, dressed in a fashion akin to Gothic Lolita. Narrowing her eyes in her smaller form, Office watched the fallen angel pull what was hers into the school. The boy. He belongs to me. Not one soul shall take him away from me. He is mine. Feeling a burst of emotion swell within her, the Ouroboros dragon closed her gray eyes and numerous snakes manifested around her body before she disappeared completely. As Issei walked out of his last classroom, he felt a tap on his shoulder. Turning around, he discovered the one who tapped him was Yuma. Yuma-san. Smiling cheerfully, Yuma put her hands behind her back. Hey, Issei. Hey, Ice-san. Issei and Yuma turned to see Hyoudou Kiba walking towards them. It took Yuma all of her willpower to prevent herself from snarling in irritation. Why does he keep interrupting me whenever I need to talk to Issei? Cheerfully ignoring the annoyed look on Yuma's face, Hyoudou smiled as he spoke to Issei. So did you think about what I said earlier? About visiting the occult research club? The president really wants to see you. Issei blinked and rubbed his head in confusion. Yuma widened her eyes and before she knew it, she was grabbing Issei's arm. Ignoring the surprised look on Issei's face, Yuma flashed Hyoudou a mocking smile. Sorry Prince Charming, but Issei-kun and I have plans for today. Both Issei and Hyoudou widened their eyes, the former in shock and the latter in disbelief. We do? Issei stuttered. Yuma smiled as she looked over to Issei. Well, of course silly. We talked about it in class. But come on. We should get going. Pulling a confused Issei along with her, Yuma snickered as she noticed the look on Hyoudou's face. Serve him right. Watching Yuma drag Issei out of the school, Hyoudou raised an eyebrow and crossed his arms in thought. What would a fallen angel want with Ice-san? In the occult research club. So the fallen angel said she had plans with Issei. Yeah, but Hyoudou answered. The crimson-haired girl narrowed her eyes and crossed her arms. What does a fallen angel want with him? Not only that, but what does Azazel want with him? She sighed and put her hands on her desk. And here I was hoping he would feel a bit more comfortable in coming to the occult research club today. Hyoudou smiled and tried to reassure the girl. Rya-sama, I'm sure he'll come around. We just have to make sure Yuma Amano doesn't do anything too drastic. Rya's Gremory, the president of the occult research club, the school's #1 beauty, and as well as one of Kuo Academy's 2 great ladies, adopted a serious look. Getting up from her desk, she walked over to the couch tables and picked up a chess piece. The pawn. As she looked at it closely, her blue-green eyes seemed to be glowing with great concentration. I only have access to 8 pawn pieces, but I'm starting to dread that even those might not be enough. I don't think mutation pieces will work, even if I borrowed a few pawn pieces from Sona. Placing the chess piece down onto the board, Riaz walked over to the club window and peered out of it to see Issei walking along with Yuma. I can't rush it though. Besides, there's a chance that he doesn't even want to become a devil, but perhaps I can convince him. Smiling deviously, Riaz narrowed her eyes as she kept Issei in her sights. I won't let an interesting cowhide pass by so easily. Outside of Kuo Academy. Yuma-san? Why did you? Yuma smiled at the confused look on Issei's face and giggled. Sorry about that, Issei-kun. I guess I just wanted you all to myself for a few minutes. But why? Yuma giggled again and put her hand in front of her mouth to suppress her laughter. He's so innocent about all this. Calming herself, Yuma smiled and turned to look at Issei. Issei-kun? Are you free tonight? I was thinking we could hang out. Issei blinked and rubbed his head in confusion. Well, ring ring. Issei and Yuma widened their eyes at the sudden beeping noise and the former reached into his pocket, taking out his cell phone. Flipping it open, he widened his eyes as he read the message. Looking up at Yuma, Issei gave her a shy look. Sorry, Yuma-san. I have to go home again. What again? Yuma widened her eyes as she watched Issei run across the bridge for the second time. Huffing softly, Yuma crossed her arms and pouted. Every time I suggest something we could do together, he always has something he has to do. Geez, it's not like I'm plotting to kill him or anything. That'd just be stupid. Feeling a little annoyed and disappointed, Yuma stormed off in the opposite direction, trying to calm herself. Issei's house. Issei opened his house door and looked inside to see Liko already standing in front of him with a satisfied smirk on her face. Blinking in confusion, Issei shut the door behind him and rubbed the back of his head. Liko-san. Smiling at her cousin, Liko brushed her dark silver hair back and placed a hand on her hip. So you got my message? Good. Let's go. Where do you go? It's a surprise, my Issei-toko. It wouldn't be fun if I just told you, now would it? Well, Issei started before he inwardly sighed, is the place where we're going to that important? Liko flashed Issei a small smile, prompting the latter to widen his eyes at the sight. Does my baby cousin not want to spend time with me? Harsh. Issei noticeably tensed at Liko's words. No, that's not it at all, Liko-san. Liko's small smile widened as she grabbed Issei by the arm and dragged him with her. Great. She responded cheerfully. In the underworld, base of the fallen angels. Something troubling you, Rainer? Yuma Mono, now dressed in an immodest variation of an S&M attire, pouted as she crossed her arms. Azazel rose an eyebrow in wonder and then he shrugged and looked back to researching more about sacred gears. Nothing, Azazel-sama. She's just pissed off because she didn't get to hang out with her precious Issei-kun. Rainer turned to glare at a buxom fallen angel who had blue hair and golden brown eyes. Mind your own business, Kalwerner. My, aren't we snippy today? Shut up. Now, girls. Let's not fight now. You can do it tomorrow. Rainer and Kalwerner raised simultaneous eyebrows as they looked at Azazel, who was still researching with a concentrated look on his face. The student council room. Absolutely not, Riaz. What do you mean, Sona? Aren't we friends? Sona fixed her glasses as she listened to her childhood friend begging her. Narrowing her violet eyes, she answered her friend in a calculating and cold voice. Yes, we are friends. However, our friendship shouldn't be affected by your desire to claim our cowhide. Do you wish to claim him as a piece for yourself? Sona rolled her eyes at Ria's accusation, but she complied by answering her anyway. Even if I wanted to make Issei Hyoudou my pawn, it would be pointless. Riaz widened her eyes in confusion. What do you mean? I know he costs more than 8 pawn pieces. I'm sure I could retrieve some more. Sona eyed her friend for a moment and closed her violet eyes. It's pointless, Riaz. Issei Hyoudou is much too powerful. As far as I'm concerned, none of our pieces can be used on him. I don't understand. It's as Kaichu has just stated. Riaz looked over at the black-haired girl with blue, semi-rimmed glasses with square lenses. Tsubaki Shinra, the vice president of the student council, narrowed her eyes as she stood next to Sona. We all know that Issei's energy structure indicates that he is by no means a human at all. But, regarding the pieces possessed by you and Kaichu, they are useless against Issei. Riaz blinked several times in disbelief. You mean they won't work on him? But why not? Perhaps he is more than just a non-human. Sona mused. Ara. The three beauties of Kuo Academy looked over to see a black-haired girl with the orange ribbon in her hair. Akeno Himejima held a surprised look on her face as her violet eyes widened in disbelief. Is our little cowhide so powerful that not even the evil pieces will work on him? Correct. Answered Tsubaki. Another factor we should consider is his energy output, Riaz. It's absolutely colossal, even by the standards of a devil of the ultimate class. And it's constantly growing. Sona stated. Rias narrowed her eyes as she listened carefully to Sona's words. So even if we found out the number of evil pieces we would need to recruit Issei, it still wouldn't be enough. It couldn't be dealt with anyway. As I said, the massive energy output he possesses seems to rise substantially every so often. It doesn't matter how many evil pieces we collect, they won't work on Issei Hyoudou anyway. Rias crossed her arms, and she frowned. Well, there goes my hopes of adding him to my peerage. It is a shame. I know I would have loved to get a new cowhide. Akeno added her 2 cents. It is a shame. Sona said. What is Tsubaki? Sona asked her. Realizing quickly she had hummed in disappointment out loud, Tsubaki composed herself and crossed her arms. Nothing, Kaichu. I had something bothering my throat. You don't have to lie, Tsubaki. We're all a little disappointed as well. It's a shame our little cowhide won't be able to join any of our peerages. Akeno said. Tsubaki fought in vain to suppress the blush that slowly formed on her face, but alas, it appeared and she lightly glared at the amused Akeno. She couldn't deny that she was a little disappointed when Sona had informed her that Issei was unable to join her peerage. At first, she had thought that Rias had defeated Sona in a bet to see who would claim Issei, but imagined her surprise when Sona had revealed that Rias wouldn't be able to claim Issei as well. Rias sighed as she placed her hand on her cheek. That's what I get for wanting a powerful young boy in my peerage. Suddenly, a flame-like magic circle appeared in the middle of the student council room and a silhouette appeared out from above it. Rias, Akeno, Sona and Tsubaki covered their eyes from the brightness and as the light faded, they removed their arms from their face. Squinting her eyes, Rias widened her eyes in shock as well as the other women in the student council. Riser Phoenix, releasing a pool of flames that surrounded his body, glared at the crimson-haired beauty. Where is he, Rias? Where is who? Riser narrowed his blue eyes darkly. The boy is called Issei Hyoudou. I need to find him. At the mention of their cowhide, the 4 most popular girls at Kuo Academy narrowed their eyes simultaneously. Sona crossed her arms as she glared at the Phoenix male. What do you want with him, Riser? With a scoff, Riser wiped some dust off of his blazer jacket and looked towards the women. Not that it's any of your business, but I'll tell you anyway. I wish to fight him. In the shopping centers. Why are we at the mall? Isatoko asked so many questions. Issei cautiously looked around his surroundings and saw many people mingling around the mall. He didn't know why Liko had taken him to this place. Smiling at the look on her cousin's face, Liko changed her expression and narrowed her eyes. She took a seat next to him on the bench. Her facial expression then morphed into a concerned yet harsh glare. Isatoko. We need to talk. Issei widened his eyes and turned to look at his cousin. About what? About you. What about me? Sighing and placing her hand on her forehead, Liko turned to look at her adoptive cousin. Issei. What is your opinion on life? Raising a confused eyebrow at the unexpected question, Issei rubbed his head. Well, I don't really have an opinion, Liko-san. I know that life is short, but… Staring at her cousin with an unreadable look, Liko closed her eyes and shook her head. So small. You're so small, my Isatoko. Too fragile. Issei widened his eyes at the reply. Liko turned to glare at her cousin with harsh and sharp crimson ruby orbs of vision. But the way you are always acting, life is not going to be your greatest ally. Life is going to take advantage of you because it relies on your personality to help screw you over. The young man looked at his cousin in surprise. Narrowing her crimson eyes until they were slits, Liko stood up from her seat and maintained her harsh glare. You're weak, Issei, and because you're so weak, you'll never be strong enough to live your own life if you keep acting like this. You need to stop being so nervous and better yourself. Liko sharply gulped down the lump in her throat. She knew what she was saying was harsh, but she had to get through to her cousin. With his shy personality, the world was going to be something that he would always fear, and God knows, Liko didn't want that tragedy to befall on Issei. As he looked up at his glaring cousin, Issei adopted a shocked look on his face. As he remembered bits and portions of his life so far, he widened his eyes on how Liko was correct. The harassment from the kids about his eyes wasn't the only thing that was harming him. It was himself. Shutting off from society and not interacting with people had certainly hindered him as a person. He had always stayed to himself, fearing that everyone would judge him based on his appearance. He was hurting himself. He was the one who was stopping himself from moving on. Liko-san's right. I'm only hurting myself, and if I keep doing that then life might just know. Life will hurt me. Isatoko. At the call of his cousin's nickname for him, Issei looked up just in time to see Liko placing her hand on his cheek. With soft yet stern eyes, Liko stared at her cousin with concern and pressed her forehead against his. I am telling you all this as a concerned cousin who loves you. So much. Do you understand? Staring wide-eyed at his cousin, Issei gained a slight serious look and he slowly nodded. Satisfied at her cousin's answer, Liko removed her hand from Issei's cheek and went to walk away from him. I'm going to walk around the mall for a bit. I'll meet you back here. Alright. Stay here and wait for me. Maintaining his sad yet somber look, Issei nodded to his cousin. Staring at her cousin, Liko went off to another direction. Satoko. As he sat on the bench, Issei placed his hand on his cheek, thinking about what Liko had said. She was right, no doubt about that. He really had to toughen up if he was going to survive life. Here he was, avoiding everyone, and he wasn't even an adult yet. I still have a lot of years ahead of me, and here I am, wasting them away. Excuse me? Are you Issei Hyoudou? Looking up, Issei raised an eyebrow as he saw two girls in strange clothing. Who are they? One was a well-endowed young woman of Chinese descent with shoulder-length black hair and blue-green eyes. Her hair had two Chinese-style buns on both sides of her head, while the front features bangs formed a slight V-shape across her forehead. She wore a navy blue kippah with gold accents, a white sash around her stomach, and black low-heeled shoes. She also wore a black armbands over her forearms. The second girl had blue hair and light brown eyes. Her hair was styled with 4 short ponytails, with 2 of the 4 pointed up and the remaining 2 pointed down. The front of her hair featured split bangs going across her forehead, with side bangs framing her face. Her outfit consisted of a white haori with a red obi, which was worn under a red happy coat. She wore bandages on her forearms and shins and wore black guards over her hands. Covering her feet were a pair of samurai. Issei noticed the proud smirks on the girls' faces and he felt that he was about to be in a dangerous situation. Who are you? The girl of Chinese descent placed her hand on her hip, narrowing her blue-green eyes. Who we are is none of your concern. The only thing you need to know is that our master, Riser-sama, requires your presence. Riser? At another section of the mall. Liko sighed as she ordered a beverage. She was getting mixed feelings about her talk with Issei. It had to be said. I'm aware of his past, but I can't have a cousin who shuts himself away all the time. If he keeps doing that, his life is going to be the worst. It just had to be said. Taking a sip of her drink, Liko closed her eyes and walked off to another section of the mall. Looking around her surroundings, Liko raised an eyebrow as she felt something behind her. Stopping for only a second, Liko turned around, only to see nothing. Raising an eyebrow, Liko turned back around and her crimson ruby eyes widened as she dropped her drink in surprise. The Occult Research Club. Why on earth do you want to fight Issei? Riaz asked. She was genuinely confused on why Riser Phoenix wanted to fight someone he didn't even know. Her blue eyes green widened. Did Riser sense his power as well? The Phoenix male scoffed and crossed his arms. That's none of your concern, Riaz. Riaz narrowed her eyes. It is my concern, Riser. Why? Because he's a part of your peerage. Issei Hyoudou is unaffected by the evil pieces. Sona put in her 2 cents. Riser widened his eyes a little and then he shrugged. Suddenly, a magic circle appeared next to him, revealing a busty woman with long, wavy purple hair that fell all the way down her back and matching eyes. Bowing down to Riser, the woman smiled as she lifted herself up. Riser-sama, Shulin and Mira have seized the boy. He is now in the underworld. Smiling, Riser placed a hand on the woman's shoulder and rubbed it. Excellent work, Ubeluna. Our match will start soon, I expect. The girls of the Occult Research Club and the Student Council widened their eyes, with Riaz speaking their mutual thoughts. I'll ask you again, Riser. Why do you want to fight Issei? Turning around to face her, Riser sneered. You and I both know that his power has been sensed far across the trenches of the underworld, Riaz. The reason I want to fight him is because I want to see if he is truly powerful. But he doesn't even know that he has powers to begin with. Don't you think it's dangerous to fight someone who doesn't know his or her own strength? Akeno yelled. Riaz narrowed her eyes darkly as she nodded in agreement to Akeno's statement. Riser, I can guarantee that once my Ani-sama hears about this, he'll. Spare your threats, Riaz. Surzik-sama was actually one of the participants who agreed for this fight to commence. What? Ani-sama wouldn't. He did. It seems he and I have the same wish. We both want to see the full extent of Issei Hyoudo's power. Smirking widely at the shocked faces from the girls, Riser put his hands in his blazer pockets. I got permission from Surzik-sama to have this fight with the brat, but I didn't tell Surzik-sama how I would go about firing up the brat. Your attempted fight with Issei is pointless if he doesn't have any experience to support himself, Riser. That is not a fair fight. Tsubaki stated as she narrowed her eyes. Like that matters. Soon enough, I'll prove that this brat is nothing more than a barely lit light bulb. Placing his hand on the ground, a magic circle resembling the shape of a phoenix appeared. Looking up at the four beauties of Kuo Academy, Riser sent them a dark smirk. The fight between Issei and I is going to be broadcasted. You can come to the underworld if you wish. However, if you don't want to see the brat beaten to death up close, I suggest you simply watch from your little televisions. And with that message, the Phoenix Devil, along with Yubaluna, disappeared as the magic circle engulfed them and transmitted them away. Riaz, Akeno, Sona and Tsubaki all stood inside the occult research club, all unable to believe what was happening. Arena in the underworld. Issei didn't know what had just happened. One minute he was at the mall, and the next minute he appeared to be in an arena of some sort. As he looked around his surroundings, he noticed a large crowd of formal-dressed people sitting above the arena. Where am I? Issei Hyoudou. At the call of his name, Issei looked up to see a young man with short blonde hair and dark blue eyes. He was dressed in a burgundy blazer with gold embroidery on the right with matching pants and black dress shoes. Underneath his open blazer was a white dress shirt that was not fully buttoned. Who are you? Riser smirked as he looked down at his opponent. So this is the brat I was so paranoid about. To think I believed that he was actually a terror to look at. Though his eyes are strange looking. Humph, no matter. I'll make short work of him. You want to know who I am? I'm the end of your life, that's who I am. Issei widened his eyes and took a step back. What the heck is going on? Those two girls. They said their master required my presence. Are you their master? Give the boy a prize. Blinking several times, Issei narrowed his eyes a little in annoyance. In his opinion, he knew the guy who was standing in front of him was belittling him. What do you want with me? Riser didn't respond, but he maintained his condescending smirk. Above the crowd, a man in his early 20s with shoulder-length crimson-red hair and blue-green eyes appeared and faded away before reappearing between Riser and Issei. He sent his eyes towards Riser before sending them to Issei. So this is the famous Issei Hyoudou. That's right, Sirzik-sama. Riser added. Issei blinked in confusion. How do you know my name? I don't know any of you people. Sirzik Lucifer, the older brother of Riaz Gremory, smiled as he looked back at Riser. Riser, I sense a great power within this boy. He smiled wider as he looked over to the confused Issei. I wish you good luck, Issei Hyoudou. But I don't understand. What's happening? Issei asked. Transmitting away from the two and reappearing on his throne, Sirzik placed his hands on his lap as he waited for the imminent battle. Crossing his arms, Riser sneered at Issei. What's happening is that we are going to fight, and whoever is left standing achieves victory. Issei widened his eyes further. Fight? What do you mean? I don't want to fight you. I don't even know you. I don't even care about victory. Why? Because you're frightened you'll lose. I don't blame you, because you're right to be afraid. No. I barely even know you. I didn't do anything to you. Issei shouted in great bafflement. Why did this guy want to fight him? He'd never met Riser at all. And yet, this man wanted to fight him for no reason. Feigning an impatient look in his eyes, Issei took a step back. No. There's no reason for us to fight. I won't fight you. Just bring me back to my world and we'll never have to see each other again. Riser narrowed his eyes darkly. It won't be fun to fight him if he's so hesitant. The dark smile then grew on his face. Perhaps goading him is an option. I certainly don't want to waste my time fighting a hesitant opponent. I see now. You won't fight me, because you're a spineless coward. Issei's eyes widened at the insult. What? No I. Riser smirked wider as he continued his goading. Or is it because you're too weak? You're just a timid little fool who doesn't even deserve to live in this world. Issei looked taken aback by Riser's jibe. Or, is it because you're just a worthless excuse for a human being? Oh wait, you aren't even human, are you? What with those eyes of yours, it makes me want to just put you out of your misery. Feeling his heart pounding, Issei started to feel an emotion he had not felt in a long time. Unbridled hatred. Pure, raw anger. It was an emotion he had felt for many years. That day when the bullies had approached him at his elementary school, only to surround him into a physical confrontation. Their mocking words he was starting to remember. Riser's smirk widened as he noticed Issei with his head down, gritting his teeth. Almost there. Now for the last one. If you're so hesitant to fight me, then this might change your mind. Issei lifted his head up and gave Riser a rare harsh glower. The crowd above the arena began to stare with widened eyes at Issei. Riser, on the other hand, appeared absolutely ecstatic. Above the arena, a large screen TV that appeared as an item akin to a jumbotron appeared. Riser smirked as he pointed to the screen. Watch closely, brat. This is something I want to show you. Narrowing his eyes, Issei looked up as the screen showed less static and his eyes widened when the static cleared up. Liko-san. The dark silver-haired girl was unconscious, appearing as though she was trapped onto the wall with glowing binds on her wrists and legs. Next to her was Ubeluna, who was holding a staff-like scepter directed at Liko. As his eyes widened in disbelief and his teeth gritted with rage, Issei slowly turned to look at Riser. Riser kept his smirk as he noticed that Issei's entire body was shaking in an attempt to calm himself. Finally. About time this brat got angry. His eyes twitching, Issei tightened his hands into fists. Riser. Let her go. I don't think so, Issei Hyoudou. Riser looked up at Ubeluna and smiled wider. You know what to do. Yes, Riser-sama. Issei widened his eyes. What's she going to do? Answer me, Riser. Ubeluna, with a dark smirk on her face, closed her eyes as her wand brightened. Issei tensed at the sight and he took a step forward as he noticed the woman placing the wand directly on Liko's neck. What are you doing? Riser, tell her to stop. Not even moving an inch, Riser smirked as he nodded for Ubeluna to continue. Her smirk growing, Ubeluna pressed the wand deeper onto Liko's neck and the wand glowed brighter until the wand suddenly emitted a wave of fire that immediately morphed into a cloud of smoke, the result resembling the explosion of a bomb. Issei froze in his spot, his mouth agape with absolute shock. Well, that's done. What do you think about that, Issei Hyoudou? Riser taunted. Raising an eyebrow at receiving no response, Riser set his blue eyes towards Issei. The young man's body shook in tremors, his brown hair covering his eyes. Gritting his teeth, Issei trembled as he closed his hands into fists. You? How could you? Riser, why? The Phoenix male smirked as he had finally gotten what he wanted. It's about time he got serious. Perhaps our battle will be more satisfying. Setting himself into a battle position, Riser widened his eyes when he felt the ground shaking. He looked up to see the crowd trying to balance themselves as they all looked in confusion. Hey? What's happening? The whole arena's shaking. What? Riser widened his eyes further. Everything's shaking. He looked back down to stare cautiously at Issei, whose hair still covered his eyes. Suddenly, Issei's hair began to rise up. However, it lowered back down before it rose up once again, the change repeating constantly. Riser looked down to see the ground of the arena beginning to lift up as cracks were ejected from the ground. Riser looked up in surprise to see Issei's hair rising up once more, but this time it seemed to take a spiky shape to it. His former brown hair had morphed into an orange-yellow jutted upward hairstyle. Orange-yellow spiky locks of hair spiked upwards, pointing in all directions, giving Issei a whole different look. Riser widened his eyes in shock. What happened to his appearance? Riser. At the call of his name, Riser widened his eyes when he saw Issei's body tremble even harder. Issei lifted his head, revealing his original soft multicolored eyes, now morphing into constricted pupils. Before Riser could react, Issei lifted his head up and let out a great bellow as his eyes and pupils disappeared completely. The large orange-yellow aura of the leftover solar energy within his body flared outwardly and covered him entirely. What? Riser screamed. In front of him was now a quiet orange-yellow spiky-haired Issei, whose body seemed to be more developed and his skin tone glowed lighter than usual, along with his energy output increasing from the aura that surrounded him. Empowered by the solar energy within him, Issei turned his pupils' eyes towards Riser, who looked at the angered young man in absolute shock. Who the hell are you? Gritting his teeth, Issei clenched his fist and with a bellow, he released a flare of solar flare-like energy that formed into an aura. I told you that I didn't want to fight you. I begged you to stop and to let go of my cousin. I asked you to quit it. Issei started to shake as his aura flared out once more. The crowd above the arena stared in shock at the non-human. Narrowing his pupil-less eyes, Issei screamed out his final outburst. But you didn't listen and you blew it. You blew it. Riser. Thanks for watching this video. Part 1 is over. If you really enjoy this video, like, subscribe and comment down below and turn on that bell notification. And also check out the playlist that I have created and enjoy. Link is in the description. See you in the next video. Goodbye.